Now, let me give you a more complex goal.
Yeah. Well,
Before, I wanted you to defend the fact that Hitler was a bad guy.
yeah, right.
Now, I want you to defend the fact that, but he had some good traits. What were
Yeah,
they?
right. It gets harder. Yeah.
And it's
More
like
nuance.
it's the same exercise, but now you're adding nuance to
Yeah.
the outcome,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then you could say, and now I want you to make the argument that the 78 years of globalization that we've had since the United States won World War II was a direct result of Hitler, and our lives would be worse had he not existed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hands-On Logos podcast. This is where we discuss current events, personal growth, and any other random topic that crosses our minds. Our goal is to have a meaningful discussion that help us to see the topics we discuss more clearly. Our hope is we can help you expand your self-awareness, develop your critical thinking, and learn to be less reactive to the world around you. And most importantly, remember, be curious. If you like what you hear, like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment. We want to hear what you think. We appreciate you.
Chris, guess what day this is? Come on.
It is Friday, and you know what Friday is?
It's Friday. This is podcast day, but let me tell you something, Chris. This is not just any ordinary Friday. This is what's considered to be Pie Day.
Oh yes, it's Pie Day. Oh gosh, I got to go over to the pizza shop.
Well, it's not that kind of pie, but that's a good reason to get it, though. I'll tell you. I like the way you're thinking.
They give you the discount today. It's $3.14.
Awesome. Well, there you go. That's all the more. You get two then, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about, for anybody that doesn't know what pi is, and I've got to assume that most people, I'm sure, know what pi is, but it's a math constant that just goes on forever. And as far as I can remember it, it's 3.1415927, with that 7 being rounded. That's all I remember, but it just keeps going forever. And in essence, what it is, it's a relationship between the diameter of a circle. And if you think in terms of diameter, if you measured it, it's all the way around. And then if you calculate something, circumference. Sorry, Chris, I got it wrong. Circumference is all the way around. Diameter is the measurement across. And then the radius is half the diameter. So the radius is half the diameter. That's right. And so the relationship is the circumference is exactly pi times the diameter, or approximately 3. You know, if you're doing gardening, 3 is close enough to get it done. So that's a very, very significant, number.
Well, I'll hold off for the moment on what the fact that the number isn't a round number means. So
that is not a round number. Okay.
Yeah.
It's not a round number. Is that a pie joke that's coming up or whatever?
No, it's actually about God versus science.
Oh, that's well. That's I love talking about God. I love talking about science. I love talking about pretty much it's everything I'm not supposed to talk about. So
well, but the interesting thing is, I don't know how many people remember these equations. I remember pi r, and of course, pi d, which is or pi c, the circumference.
Yeah.
Is the diameter, so pi d, right? C equals pi times d, right? Yeah. And then the area is pi r squared.
Yeah, correct.
And then the volume is pi r, 4/3 pi r cubed.
Well, yeah. Well, in that case, it's not really a circle. It's that to be called a sphere or some other thing. Yeah. Yeah. Now you're doing 3D on me. Let's just keep it 2D, right?
Well, you're the one who's got the milling machine. You should be making things in 3D.
Yeah. That's yeah, that's another topic, actually. It's coming. It's slow. It's a slow process, Chris.
But the thing is, we've got all these constants in science, right? We've got the speed of light.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, 1.992792458 times 10 to the 8th meters per second squared, I think. It's one of those numbers that
what's so funny? Even if it's wrong, you sound really convinced about that, so I'm gonna believe you, even if it's not true.
There was a time when I was obsessed with that calculation of, as you approach the speed of light, time slows down.
Apparently, yeah.
And
right.
actually, and the reason why you can't calculate it exactly is because when you hit the speed of light, you're dividing by 0. And of course, dividing by 0 you can't do because it's an infinite number.
Which is undefined, right? Yeah.
But the concept of, so I would sit there, so this is me as a geeky college kid. I would sit there and I would calculate out, okay, so if I were traveling at half the speed of light,
yeah,
and went off to visit some star and came back, how long would have passed back on Earth? And I was calculating that out, and even at half the speed of light, it's not. There's a distortion, but there's not a huge amount.
No,
Right?
yeah, right.
It's exponential. It goes way up as you
Yeah,
get to the
right.
speed of light. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It was always kind of fun because coming from the world of reading science fiction, I guess maybe that's where it came from.
Well, and so how does this tie into math and science versus God?
Oh, so the concept here is we've got all these constants that we use to calculate, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So the 3.14 pi number. Why wouldn't if you were making the universe, wouldn't you just make it 3? Why make it 3.14, 192, whatever that number is?
Well, I don't know.
I mean,
don't know. It's a good
I
question.
assume. Okay, so I'm assuming if we're taking the argument that God made the universe and God made this, did he just let it happen, or did he actually design this to be a specific number for a meaning? Could it just be a random number, like I don't care what this number is, and make it a number? And could it have been 7.315 or something? But
Well,
it just occurs to me our constant numbers that we have, they fit into the equations we figure out, but science figured out the equation. Why was it set to that number in the first place?
and hang on just a second. So interesting. I'm just pulling up, like in the Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Bible, it says here, I'm just reading from AI, just, Google's your friend. The Bible doesn't explicitly state that pi equals 3, but some passages, like First Kings, Second Chronicles, describe a metal basin in Solomon's temple, seems to imply this. So it's an oversimplification. And
Well, I
the
think
Bible doesn't.
a lot of quote scientists in the old historical scientists, not modern day, used 3. I didn't think a lot of them did use 3.
Yeah, it's good enough, right? Like if you're, out in your, your garden doing something, I mean, you can step it out, and 3 is close enough. So maybe God did equal it to 3. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we're the ones that goofed it all up.
So all of our math is wrong.
God's up there going, I made it 3. Why do you guys have to complicate everything? Oh no.
and so that's how we know if someone believes in God. If they believe the value of pi is 3, right? That'll be our litmus test.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't know. You're asking some really tough questions, Chris.
It just occurs to me that if I wanted to make an argument against God, or the
Yeah.
idea that God created the universe, why would you make it overly complex?
It might be overly complex for us. Maybe for God, it's the simplest thing in the world.
So maybe 3.14 actually is a whole number in a different numbering scheme.
Very possible. Or he could have designed it differently, and just us dumb humans, that's the closest thing we could get to like actually calculating it or something.
I think I told you once that when they studied cognitive abilities of babies, they don't think that the number 5 is halfway between 1 and 9.
Oh, interesting. Mhm.
They think the number 3 is. It's exponential thought as opposed to kind of a measured unit thought.
That's
And
interesting.
so it sounds like the brain in and of itself may default to a different type of logic, a different type of thinking when it comes to understanding numbers. So the idea that you have 1, and then you have 3, and then you square it, and then you have 9, and then
It's
it's
interesting.
a
Yeah.
different form of thought. And I remember hearing that they were saying that as adults, we have a much harder time thinking exponentially, but as
Yeah.
kids, it's a much easier thing for them to be able to do.
Well, and here's another argument. I'm just going to throw this out, right? So, and who knows if any of this is right or not. So, according to the Bible, like their original sin, right? Where Eve and Adam ate the fruit that God said, don't eat that fruit. And at that point, and I believe this actually to some extent, like sin or doing the wrong thing actually corrupts your mind. And so then now you can't see things or you can't think clearly. So I don't know if this has anything to do with pi, but I know when I do that, I mean, okay, let me ask a question. Let me put an analogy. Have you ever been like grumpy or angry or feeling really sorry for yourself and you looked at an event and it got very negative and something like, oh, you always do that, or you never do that, or you're always trying to hurt me, and you just see things in a very distorted way because you're you're just literally out of your mind at that point. You're not thinking clearly. Have you ever had that experience? Please say
Yes,
yes.
but almost never. Yes, but almost never.
Okay, so I have it like almost every single day. So you're a much better human being than I am. But yeah, it's distorted because I'm just. It typically always for me revolves around just some kind of selfishness or always thinking about myself more than somebody else, and then I just distort what I think is truth, right? Then my truth is distorted.
But is that because of some wrong, some sin, something that you shouldn't have done that you did? Or is that just the way you're seeing the world? I mean, I don't think necessarily that people that have what we'll call the wrong opinion, an uninformed opinion, or looking at it through a filter that doesn't take into account things, I don't think necessarily that they did something wrong to get there. Or would your argument be that they did, even when they didn't know it? Like, if we said someone got indoctrinated into thinking in a certain way, is there a sin in being indoctrinated such that they're thinking in a certain way?
Well, so
It bothers me to call that a sin, if that makes sense.
yeah, well, sin, that's got a lot of emotionalness to it. And so if you kind of back it out, like from a Bible standpoint, sin just means you've missed the mark, right? It's like you're supposed to do this thing and you didn't do that thing. So that's called a sin. I mean, it's been so twisted into making you think it's some horrible bad thing that maybe it's not as bad as it actually is, if that makes any sense.
But I think we need to get into at some point, we need to get into the idea of sin, level of sin. Is there an acceptable level of sin that someone can have in life? Things like that. But that's not this conversation. But I think we need to get into that at some point. What I'm getting at here is when someone views something in a certain way, something's going on in their mind, and you're saying their mind is corrupted, and you could use the term corrupted, but I also I like to think that the average normal working brain human person is able to follow the same process as everyone else. The problem is the inputs that are there that are there from the beginning. The assumptions, the inputs, the associations are steering them away from following what I would call logical flow.
Yeah, and I mean that's assuming, right? That's assuming that logic is the end all be all of everything, right? I mean, there's no question that it's a very important tool, but I don't know that it's everything, right?
Well, I'm not going to say it's everything. I think it's the here's where we go into the foundational aspect, right? You
Yeah.
wanted the truth to be the foundation. I think logic is the foundation.
I
And
think so, maybe, right?
yeah, and then on top of the foundation, we add in the emotional, spiritual, other elements associated with it. And I'm not basing them on different levels of value. I'm not saying one's more valuable than the other, but of all the species and creatures that we know of, we have the most developed brain. We have the
Yeah,
most developed ability to think. So
yeah,
to me, being human requires the use of that brain. Otherwise, we're not expressing our full capability as a species.
yeah, yeah. I think so. Yeah,
And I think that logic is the way we see the world through the chemical operations of our brain,
yeah. It's a way to see. Yeah, I
right?
think a logic. But see, everybody has different kinds of logic, right?
Yeah, but generally, when we talk about different kinds of logic, there's still assumptions in flow there that you're talking about. There's a piece of information that comes in, there's an observation about it, there may be a secondary piece of information, and then someone ties the two pieces of information together, or extrapolates a piece of knowledge or an idea from that. I think all of that, regardless of whether you've got flawed facts and flawed information to start with, there is a logic flow you're following. Even someone who mischaracterizes another person as a horrible person
Yeah.
or as a fascist or as Hitler, there is a logic flow in there. It may be wrong.
Oh yeah, right.
It may be jumping and it may be ignoring aspects or jumping through other hoops or
Yeah,
not picking up all the nuances.
yeah,
Regardless, there is a logic flow. It just isn't what I would call a well-developed logic flow.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I actually think that the human mind, the way we've evolved, requires us to think logically. Whether it's good logic or bad logic, it's logically. And I wonder if there's if that is a universal amongst all sentient species, or is there, if a, I don't know, a silver-based life form instead of a carbon-based life form, or a potassium-based life form instead of a carbon-based life form, if the chemical operations are such that we wouldn't recognize what we call logic in their thought process.
Yeah, this is a very deep thing. I don't know. It's kind of hurting my brain. Can we go something a little easier? It's Friday, Chris. It's night, and I'm tired. I didn't sleep super well last night, so this is.
And neither did I. I woke up in the middle of the night with a tummy ache.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The funny thing is we talk about these things, and so how do we? Yeah, and then it always comes down to some version of like, well, okay, what is truth, right? I mean, and then everybody's got different kinds of truth. We've gone over this like 87 times already, and maybe we need 187.
This is why we really need to kind of sit down and write down the words we use.
Yeah.
And then come up with an agreed upon meaning of them.
Yeah, the best I've got right now for that is that if you and I agree on something, it's true for us. That's the best I got.
Which, by the way, we talked about that a few episodes ago, and we came to that conclusion, and I really didn't like it because it then gives weight to the person who says my truth.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's if we can have our truth, then why can't I have my truth?
Well, you can have your truth too. I mean, we just happen to sync up on some things, right?
But I think this is the problem with this is why I like facts. Right?
Well, okay, hang on. What? Okay. Since you're going here, like, okay, you got to define fact for me then. You just throw these words around without defining them.
A fact is an observable, measurable aspect of the universe
that multiple people would agree on, right?
That I think multiple people can measure. It can't be done by one person. It can't be done once. Science always has to be done more than once, right? So it has to be a tidbit of knowledge, of information, or something observable that is repeatable over and over, is measurable, and yes, that most people, the majority of people, agree that fact is what represents what's actually happening.
Well, and I think for simple things, I think that's easy, right? So I don't know, like this workbench I built here in my garage. It's about 14 feet long, and give or take a little bit. But I think most people, right? If I gave you a tape measure and you came here and I said it's about 14 feet long, you'd measure it and you'd say, yeah, it's about 14. Not exactly, but it's about 14 feet long. It's closer to 14 than 13, or closer to 14 than 15. I think we could probably agree on that. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something that we could all agree on, right? Would that be considered a fact then?
I would say that would be an agreed upon fact, yeah.
Oh, okay. But now, is there a difference?
I think the fact is you would have an exact measurement. And as long as I use the same measuring stick as you, I should come to the same measurement.
Well, here's the thing. So I'm gonna push back on that. I think it's impossible to have an exact measurement, because in machining or in anything, nothing's exact. Everything's like this distance plus or minus some value, right? Some tolerance on that. And you start getting the question, like when you say something's flat, it's like really nothing's flat. It's just how flat is it? Is a better
where does that variance come from?
Well, it comes from the measuring device, and so literally, at the essence of it, I don't know if this ties in or not, but just your fact of observing something is changing it.
So I would say there's an uncertainty in anything.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Uncertainty in everything.
It's because you have no way to make it 100% exact. You can make it
over time.
100% identical is the word I mean.
Yeah, right.
So
how reproducible.
Even when you measure something 10 times, depending on the measuring stick you use, you might get 10 different measurements.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Correct.
Right. So if you're measuring down to the 16th of an inch, you can probably get it right 10 times in a row.
But if you're measuring down
to the millionth of an inch, that's less likely that you'll be able to get it.
Yeah. Right. So the general rule, I think, in machining or engineering, you typically, if you want to measure something, the rule of thumb is you need the thing that you're measuring with needs to be approximately 10 times more precise than the thing you're measuring.
So as long as we're talking in the same level of precision,
Yeah, right.
then saying it's around 14 feet or just over 14 feet would be a fact. Because
Yeah.
as long as you and I are agreeing on the level of precision, but if I'm one of those people who has to go to point whatever in my measurements, I'm going to go, no, it's not about 14 feet, it's 14.32 feet.
Yeah,
something
right.
like that.
Right.
So
And that's what
then we're not in agreement on our measurements, on the level of measurement we're going to.
yeah, we have to pre-agree on this. So pretty much when you're dealing with any sort of machining or a part or something like that, everything is always called out in tolerance. It's got to be 1 inch plus or minus, 50 thou or something like
Yeah.
that.
So I would say then, yes, as long as we're agreed upon the basis for taking a measurement, we can agree on the measurement being a fact and as being not a numeric value that has a lot of detail. We can agree on that.
Yeah, if we agree, but we have to agree on how precise
We
it
can
is.
agree that pi is 3 if we're not overly caring to get really accurate measurements.
Yeah, it depends. Like if you're planting a garden out in the back and you're just getting potting soil, 3's close enough.
And
right?
I might go, you know what? It's very easy for me to go to 3.14, so I'm going to go to 3.14. And then the guy next door goes, no, every inch is important. I'm going to go to 3.1419. And he goes out 8 digits.
Yeah.
But at that point, we're not speaking the same level of detail. We're not speaking at the same level of precision.
Well, that's why we call that out, though, because we talk about how precise do we have to be.
And this is why when you have a conversation between a subject matter expert and someone who's not,
Yeah.
it's really hard sometimes if the subject matter expert doesn't have the ability to step back from the details to communicate with the others, because the others don't really care about those 15 decimal points past the decimal.
Right.
They only,
Right.
They only want a rough idea.
Yeah.
So you need to speak at the level of the person you're talking to. So
Yeah, based upon the application, right? Or based upon how important is this actually?
and you're more self-aware subject matter experts, whatever geek or nerd of that particular ilk, they recognize that this is the way they are, and then when they're talking to a layman, they adjust their speaking to speak to the layman.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think based on context, most of the time we get that. So if I told you, like, hey, Chris, I got to go to the restroom right now. I'll be back in a little bit, right? I mean, you're going to take that to be, okay, the standard time you got to go pee, wash your hands. Okay, maybe that's a couple minutes, maybe.
Yeah.
Now, if I come back 3 hours later, you're going, okay, hang on, wait a minute, dude. Well, Chris, I said a little bit,
Yeah, in the galactic scheme of things, 3 hours is nothing. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think context plays into it. And if you don't agree on the context, then you have to start getting more and more precise in your language.
Well, but this is where all the big arguments come from, right? This is where your abortion argument, your wokeness arguments all come from. This idea that the context is not standardized amongst the people having the conversation.
Yeah, right. Because they see the world fundamentally see the world differently. Actually,
But this is why I'm thinking we need to come up with a list of the word we use and what we mean by the word we use.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's good.
Right?
I think that's very good.
So,
And then,
I'm thinking, so when we get a guest and they say something that we're like, oh, okay, well, let me tell you what we mean by this word.
yeah, right, exactly. This is how we've defined it. Right, exactly. Yeah,
So
and
it's like even like religion versus spiritual. We talked about that with Jamar.
yeah, right.
What do we mean when we talk about a particular word?
Yeah, I still don't even know what that stuff means, because people just start going, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. It's like, okay, what does that mean? I mean,
Well, that's probably similar to the argument Jamar was making, that religious to him ties into organized religion.
yeah, right. Yeah.
And to me, it never has. Religious has always been a mental state, not the worship of a particular church or religion.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of defined it as religion as sort of, I don't know what spiritual means, but I define religion as like man's attempt to get to God, right?
Well, I would say spiritual includes like the 60s hippies with their crystals and their pyramids and all those types of things. That's very spiritual, right? It's very much the supernatural or the things that we can't explain with science.
Very much like it's pretty much like, okay, let's go drop some acid and let's go have a spiritual experience, right? I mean,
Yeah.
whatever that means,
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a religious experience, but some people might.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it depends. Maybe like, oh man, I saw God. I hung out with God for a while. Like, cool. Okay, what did you say?
The discussion of definitions just made me wonder. The word layman, when I said it, where does that come from? Does that come
Layman?
from religion? He's a layman. As
I don't
opposed
know.
to, I think it might actually come from religion.
So part of when I'm studying Greek, actually, you have to look at the meaning, and I think it's like, I think if I remember right, if I'm a good Greek student, it's there's something called morphology, which basically means how has the definition or how is this the usage of this word changed across time, you know?
So, by the way, I just looked it up. Yeah, layman means non-cleric. A layperson is a non-cleric, right? So,
Non-cleric, so just your average dude, not officially trained, and yeah,
yeah. So the
didn't go to
distinction
school.
would have been a religiously trained person or a priest or a cleric versus someone who wasn't. So okay.
Yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. So I'll tell you a little Bible story, right? Because I was just studying this in Greek just like last time. I have a Greek coach, so I meet with him every week and we just talk about Greek stuff, right? And it's interesting because there was a story where Jesus was very hard on these Pharisees and Sadducees and the people. And so he said, in order to see the kingdom of God, you have to be born again. And he's like, and Nicodemus is like, this is like right before John 3:16. He's like talking about, well, how can I be born again? What do I do? Go back into my mom's womb and come back out again? And so, anyways, to make this really short and sweet, Jesus said, you don't even understand. Like they talked about the wind blowing. You don't even understand the most basic of things. If you don't understand this, how are you going to understand things of like heaven or whatever? So it's sort of like different levels of like understanding. I have no idea how this replies to anything, but it's just different ways of seeing things.
Understand, but not in a scientific way.
Yeah, I don't understand either. So I guess we're good. I was just kind of babbling.
I mean, honestly, this sounds like take the pebble from my hand, grasshopper, kind of a thing. It's
Well,
like,
hey, that makes sense though. As soon as you
right?
take the pebble from my hand, as soon as you snatch it, that means you're good enough to,
But the
you're
idea
faster
means
than I am.
you don't understand the world. You don't understand the world around you. You think it's simply a matter of taking it from my hand, but it's a matter of the world. The way the world has to be for you to be able to take it from my hand is a different world than you understand.
But yeah, very possible. Yeah, there's just things you don't understand. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not just speed and strength. It's a way of viewing the world. It's a way of understanding how people think, and it's holistic. It's everything. That's that horrible word holistic that everyone uses.
That horrible word. Yeah, that people love saying because nobody knows what it means. And no matter what you say, you're like, well, I didn't exactly mean it like that. What I meant was this,
It means I can charge 20% more is what it means.
That means what it is. Yeah. We call those weasel words. They trained us in weasel words in my first finance class. Usually customary most of the time. He said, you don't commit to anything. And then if it doesn't go the way you said, it's like, well, remember when I said customary usually? Well, this was not a usual event. This is a one out event. So I was right all along.
It See, my favorite is the one that's a little more blunt and obvious. Is it depends.
It depends, of course. Well,
Because
that's what they taught us in finance too. It depends on and it does. That's true though, right?
the thing is, if I take it to a high enough level, I can give you an answer where it depends is not the answer. But then there's no certainty of it because it's such a generic, vague idea. If
Well,
you
you
want,
gotta,
if you want
yeah.
specificity, it gets to it depends.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I could refer something to you, but I just need to know a lot more information, right? Like for instance, in class, it'd always be, "Oh, teacher, hey, what's the best stock to buy?" And he's like, "Yeah, the one that goes up." And
Yeah,
we were
that's the obvious answer. But you go, oh, but that doesn't tell me anything. So what should I buy if I want to hold it for 40 years? Well, it depends.
that's different, right? That's very. Then you got to look at fundamentals, and there's all sorts of things you got to look at. Yeah, so this becomes much more complicated, and I think things become much more nuanced the more precise you want to get.
And that's the difficulty we have, right? We need precision to make sure we're communicating as closely as possible to what we really mean.
Yeah.
And yet, that we need precision. We don't want to actually communicate at that level because it's hard. So
Well,
we
it's
communicate at a level where the words have it's almost like the lowest common denominator, right? The idea that we're going to pick the word as to what it means down here, and you're going to extrapolate what I actually mean way up here.
well, and the thing is, Chris, it becomes harder and more expensive the more precise you've got to be. So then we come back and we say, well, I don't want to put all that effort and thought and cost and money to be that precise because it's not really necessary. Like, if your wife calls you, say, what time are you going to be home for dinner? It's like, oh, I'll be home around 6, right? Now, what that mean, I'm not sure what that means. I guess you probably predefine that, but that could be maybe 5 minutes before, 5 minutes after. That's around 6, right? Somebody else might define that as something different. Somebody else might define it as, okay, so here's an example. So my master Alan, who I learned jiu-jitsu from, they're in Brazil, right? So they think on time, like 1 o'clock, as long as the time starts with a 1, you're on time.
Yep.
So
There are
so
some
that's their
cultures that are
level
that
of
way.
precision, right?
Yes, and other cultures they make sure they're on time or early.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I remember when I was living in Japan, people would say the party's going to start at whatever time, and if I didn't get there by that time, they were offended. If I got there late,
Oh, interesting. And so in America, we have these, what is it called? Like fashionably late, right?
fashionably
We
late,
have
yes.
terms for
You
these.
don't want to be the first person because that somehow shows a weakness of your own character.
Like you're not enough important or you don't have anything else better to do or whatever it is.
Which is a horrible way to think of it. We need to reframe our thinking to be, no, it shows that you got respect for the people you're dealing with.
Well, I mean, it's
right?
yeah, it's like it just I don't know,
It shows. Okay, so now I'm going to delve into something here. It shows our selfishness as a country. That
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
obsessed with ourselves, not with others.
Yeah, that's
Other
just the American way. Yeah.
Other cultures are much more observant of how do I impact others.
Yeah.
And it has that has a bunch of weight with it that there's a lot of baggage that goes with that too. But in this one case, we're obsessed with thinking of ourselves, so we don't really consider what being late means to others.
Yeah, yeah, and it depends on what scenario it's in. I mean, if you're talking about a party where a bunch of people gets invited, you being half an hour late, maybe it's not a big deal, right? Nobody really cares. But if they're stranded on the side of the freeway, right, in a dangerous area, being 30 minutes late could be a problem, right? So it depends. Again, from my finance class, everything depends.
It always depends, but
So that's why we got to pre talk about, well, how precise do we need to be? Because being precise and being more precise comes at a cost, right? It comes at a significantly more expensive cost.
yes, because we have to delve into and agree upon. And even if we delve into it, we may not come to the same conclusion because your information, your experience may make you think, oh, that wasn't an important thing. We don't need to go deep into that.
Yeah, right.
And I may be thinking, no, this is critical. This is life threatening if we don't get this down, right? And
Yeah.
and if we don't agree on that, then conversations around this will always have a disconnect. Even if it's just minimal, it will still have a disconnect.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you're like an engineer, right, making metal pieces or something like that, oh, I need to make this part. It's like one of the very first questions is, okay, what's your tolerances on this part, right? That's the first question. How good do you need it to be? Do you need to be good or you need to be like impeccably good? Because we can make it impeccably good, but it's going to take longer and open your checkbook up because it might be 10x the price,
Yeah. It's like in the old days, we don't worry about it as much because everything's gone to the cloud. But in the old days, when everyone had their own data centers and you ran your own computer room with servers in it, you had downtime you had to worry about all the time.
Yeah, right,
And
right.
you measure downtime in those nines, right? 99% uptime, 99.9% uptime, 99.99, 99.9999. And
Yeah,
every
right.
nine you added doubled or quadrupled the cost to maintain it at that level.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because if I need that, because they can go down every once in a while, and it's no big deal for a couple hours here, a couple hours there. Hey man, we just do one server and one data center, and it's good. But if you need it up, I mean, I need to have 10 servers spread out all over the world with different. I mean, it becomes much more complicated,
Yeah. Well, you just think about that. Let's say you wanted the exact same setup in 10 places around the world. The cost of energy and the cost of data itself varies around the world.
Yeah.
Some places are cheaper, some places are more expensive, right?
Yeah.
And some places are safer. Arizona tends to be safer from earthquakes than California, things like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you got to have redundancy. Yeah, exactly. So I think we've kind of, defined this topic. I think it's important just to ask the question.
So,
well, how good do you need it to be, or how precise are we talking about?
But this is all just about facts.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to define facts. So I think when we talk about facts, if there seems to be a disconnect, we need to go into precision.
Yeah, yeah. Like tell me, like, what do you mean by that, or something?
So,
right?
I'm not going to start the precision conversation unless I go into it thinking we have a disconnect to start with. I'm just going to start with the idea that you and I agree on facts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But defining facts, but there's a lot of assumption what a fact is, right?
Yeah. But generally, the way it would be, like even things like historically, there's no way for you or I to have firsthand experience on things historically, whether they happened or not. But
No, we just read books.
if there's consensus,
Whatever.
if it's in the books, if you've heard it from other people, then we can kind of agree on those facts. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to go into the precision like we need to have 40 different citations from different people. I'm not going to get into that kind of level of thing. But so I think facts are aspects of the world that are measurable and usually measurable over and over again by a variety of people and generally well accepted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you've sort of tightened up my definition, which was basically just we agree on it, right? So that's a fact.
Well, I think that comes to truth, right? That's where we were at with truth.
Well, fact and truth, I mean, are they different? Are they the same thing?
To me, they're different.
Maybe, yeah. How? I mean, yeah, I don't know. And then let me ask you a question. How important is defining things precisely? How important is that?
If our goal is to be able to communicate very well, I think we need to understand each other's thinking on a topic. And I think if you want to be able to argue and debate against someone, the better you understand the way they think, the better you can misrepresent it.
Yeah, no, that's yeah.
Right? If I'm gonna straw man an argument from you, I've got to understand what your argument is to be able to straw man it.
Yeah, right.
If I'm gonna go down the slippery slope with an argument of yours, I've got to understand where you're coming from, and kind of lead you down that path.
Yeah, right. And so many times you could like so many times this is jujitsu, right? Are you talking about just really basic defenses? Are you talking about getting more advanced stuff, right?
I think even more advanced stuff. The idea here being, if first of all you and I agree, if the goal is for us to come to consensus on something, then you and I need to agree on the definition of words so we can come to consensus.
Yeah. But that's still we want to work together. So that's a good thing, right?
Now the secondary, if the goal is for me to beat you in a conversation or to win an argument, I still need to know your thinking.
Yeah, right.
Right? In which case I want to know your definition, and I want to argue a different definition.
Yeah, right. Of course, actually. But in that particular case, now we're adversarial, which I think that's a good group. It's like, are we trying to work together or are we adversarial? Because those are different things. Because if we're in an adversarial thing, I'm going to try to hold as much information from you as possible, right? I don't want you to know anything. Now if I'm going to attack you, I have to give away some information, but I want you to know very little. Where we're working together, I'm fine. Here's everything I know,
Yeah, if the goal is not to come to an agreement or to come to a decision or a consensus, then you're going to want to be in the superior position to have that argument.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
And having information the other person doesn't have is an advantage that's
absolutely.
I mean that's the whole thing about selling, right? You want to have information that the buyer doesn't have to be able to sell to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So, but the idea of truth would be, this is maybe where it is if we're trying to come to an agreement on what you and I agree is our truth, we need to have an agreement on what the facts are. And I think that's where a lot of people who argue, they attack the facts to destroy the agreement on truth, to say my truth is better than your truth. So it's easier for me, instead of making a logical argument that my truth is better than your truth, I can go attack the facts the way you interpret them, and show that your logic is bad where my logic is good.
Yeah, because you're just trying to win, right? Exactly.
Right.
You're trying to win. You're trying to be right. Yeah. And I think there's different forms of that, because it could be that you just want to be right because you think that's the best option. The other option of that is, but you don't really care so much about you're being right. You just want to attack the other. You just want to beat the other person, right?
Well, that's a different thing, and that can be fun quite often, to play devil's advocate or the like. And I think that's a really good exercise for someone to do.
Yeah.
In a healthy way. I mean, to sit there and have a discussion with someone and to take the other side of the discussion.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, I think that's good. Yeah, you're very noble. Remember that one time, we haven't posted this yet, but we were just calling each other racists, just back and forth. And then in order to win, I'm like, well, I'm a better racist than you are then.
Exactly. But
That's called going down the toilet, that argument.
But the idea there being, I was making a statement of what I said was fact, which is that everyone is a racist,
Yeah, right.
right? And you gave up fighting that and then accepted it and then turned it into something else.
Well, because I just wanted to win. It's,
But
so,
and that's the thing. Like, if someone knows you're out there just to win,
yeah,
then your arguments take on a certain flavor, and others can hear it
yeah,
when they
right,
know that, right?
right.
If your goal is to actually come to a consensus on something, and this is, I guess, not okay. I'm going into politics for a second here.
Oh no.
I look at how up into the 80s, I guess, or maybe it was just that particular time frame, because everything goes through phases and cycles.
Yeah.
But even with the two parties in the U.S. fighting against each other, there were times when they were able to work together,
Because they had to, or yeah, because they wanted something,
or because there was something they felt was really good for the country, and they don't all agree on implementation, but they all agreed that something needed to happen. So
Well, let me rephrase it. It's so good for them. Let me tell you something. If Congress gets together to pass a pay raise for themselves, they're in agreement 100% on that. If they want to trade stocks and use insider information and insider trading, we're good on that. We agree on some things.
I think the idea was that there would be principles that would go across, and they would agree on principles. They wouldn't agree on implementation and particular values to those principles. So
Yeah, right.
the values impact implementation. So if Democrats were in charge, they would implement in a certain way. If Republicans were in charge, they would implement in a certain way. And I think somewhere in the past 20 years, maybe it's less, it's gotten to the point, and I think a big part of this is why we still have so many old people, is the old people were the ones who, the old white guys who fought in Vietnam together,
Yeah.
right? No matter what side of the aisle they were on, they had a certain level of respect for each other because of their shared experience.
Yeah, exactly. Of course.
And I think that we've gotten more diverse, we've gotten more representation, but in doing so, we've lost any kind of semblance of standardized background, and it's made it easier for us to attack each other at a more base level than before. Like you would attack someone's beliefs without attacking their character in the past.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And now, if you go back a couple hundred years, that's totally wrong. They would attack each other's characters too. So I'm not saying that it's always been this way, but I think in the recent past, within a generation, they were less likely to attack each other's character than they were to attack each other's beliefs or ideals or opinions. Now it's all up for grabs.
I'll forget. Yeah, I don't know if it's changed that much. It's always been a messy. Fighting is fighting. Fighting's messy, right? And it all comes down to selfishness in some form. It's like if there's limited resources, well, I want more than half, right?
Well, we did have dueling, in Congress at one point. People would duel. I mean, conceptually, that sounds totally stupid to us today, and yet there was a time when that was it, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
that was it. Yeah.
Dueling with someone because they insulted your family, because they insulted your character.
Yeah, right.
That may be one of the things that kept people from doing it, was that the repercussions of being put in a situation where violence was the outcome.
Well, and I wonder if that's why people drive nicer here in Arkansas than in California, because pretty much you can assume most people are going to have a gun, right? And so we're just a little politer. We're like, I'll be nice to you.
Is it they're more polite because they're afraid of others? Or I think in America, not America, in California, my America, California.
Your America, yeah.
We end up with the anonymity of getting behind a car, and so you can be a jerk.
Definitely, I think it's all of the factors probably put together. It's like, I think we could argue, and we should argue about the exact percentages, because that'll give us something to fight about, But I think those are all factors, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if honestly, the road rage that people have, if you saw people, if you thought really that there was a chance of the person that you're acting up against had a gun,
yeah,
you might change the way you think.
It depends on how bad I want it, right? But if it's something really important, then I'm like, well, I better shoot first, right? Depends on how important it is. And remember, this is my mom. Well, you don't remember my mom, but I remember my mom. My mom would always tell me, she's like, okay, Scott, you got to make sure, pick your battles, Sometimes you just let things go, and other things, how important is this to you? You know, I'm like,
But
okay,
so that's actually one of the other things is we've gotten so used to just not standing up for things. It started with pick your battles. Don't fight. Don't waste your time fighting battles that aren't
yeah,
going to bring any value, right? But the concept behind that was there were still things that you would stand up for.
of course, because whenever you fight, there's risk, right?
Yeah, there's
There's
risk.
tremendous risk.
You're using resources. You're possibly causing permanent damage. There's all kinds of aspects to it.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I mean, there's personal risk to you, so you got to weigh how important is this to me, and how much risk am I willing to
But
take?
it seems to me it went from being there were things that I was willing to stand up for to it's not worth the effort anymore. And when it's not worth the effort, people can't even, then the value of that principle that you would have stood up for gets degraded.
Yeah, do you see this? Like, what do they call them? Like social media or social justice warriors or whatever. They'd like fight from a keyboard, right? Or it's
You,
just,
you know, okay.
and it's
I'm
like
not
that
gonna,
takes less courage,
I'm
right?
not going to say I promote violence, but if you know that there's a good chance you're going to get hit because you said something to somebody, well, why don't you go and just you curse everyone on the street every time you see them?
Well, you just choose your words carefully. How important is that's not saying I won't do that, but it's got to be important, you know?
Yeah, but you're not going to go out there in public and interact with people and just insult everyone and say foul language to them because one of them is going to react and hit you.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, we say here in the South, we just say, "Oh, bless your heart."
But
And if you,
I assume some people would have a threshold by which at which point they might get violent.
yeah, of course, everybody
But
will.
we don't expect that anymore. We don't, so, and that's not something you have to face when you're behind a keyboard or you're behind your
No,
car.
you don't have any. I mean, maybe you get your feelings hurt, right? Or you get whatever doxxed or
I think
whatever,
that's become a
whatever the
proxy
heck.
for actually being hurt. I
Yeah,
think it used to be you would get hurt doing certain things, so you controlled your actions to minimize the chance of you getting hurt. You
yeah,
picked your battles by knowing which ones meant something to you internally,
yeah,
and
right.
you were willing to risk for. But
Yeah,
now that the chance of you getting hurt has kind of gone to almost nil,
yeah,
now the only thing you get hurt by is the feelings,
yeah,
and so
right.
suddenly you get defensive, but there's no threat of you actually being physically hurt, so you can act like an asshole and
Yeah,
and be okay with it because you're not going to get hurt
yeah,
physically hurt,
yeah,
you
right,
know.
right,
But
right, right, right.
if you go back to dueling days, you were to call someone a foul word, and you might end up shooting for your life in a duel.
Very likely, very possibly. Yeah, I don't know how real or true that. I know it's like sort of the Old West. Everybody had a gun, and then you realize that's like not many people had guns in the Old West. It
Well,
wasn't like in the movies, you know.
if we believe Alexander Hamilton's Hamilton the musical, then that's what happened to his son. So
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah. But just like going to war, like we're willing at some places to commit resources and people and money and people's lives to go to war because we don't like something, you know?
that becomes to me that's almost like a business transaction when you talk about going to war.
Yeah,
If you
but it's
talk
real
about a
people,
tribe fighting
man.
a tribe, that's a little different. When you talk about a nation fighting a nation, it's almost like to me like a just a kind of a little dirtier business decision than
Well, I mean, because you're abstracted from it, but let me tell you something. There's like real people fighting real fights and dying. Like it's
well.
real, you know?
And I think that's one thing the Ukraine war has brought to attention and is the fact that there is still the old style warfare. It's even using drones and what the U.S. has been doing for decades, and fighting remotely, and we don't need as many people in the field to do damage like we used
Right,
to be able to do
right,
with
right,
troops.
right.
That even with that, you still have a lot of people, dying
Yeah,
in militaries that don't have that kind of clout. I
yeah.
do wonder if we're going to get to a point where all the militaries that actually go to war like this will have enough technology to where it's just robot fighting robot and people are safe,
Well, it's starting.
relatively
Well,
safe.
yeah,
They're
I
never
don't
going to
know.
be totally safe because people, civilian populations are always a potential
Yeah.
target.
Did you see the Star Trek episode? There was one episode in it where they were like They didn't want to actually fight, so they had computers fight for them.
Two planets. There were two
Yeah.
planets, and they fought
Right.
a war. They've been fighting a war for hundreds of years, and the computer would figure out where they would have been shot,
Yeah.
and who would have died had a real explosion happened, and then they ordered those people in those areas to go kill themselves or to go get
Yeah,
themselves,
right. Go to the little disintegration
euthanized or
chamber.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been killed. You got 48 hours to report to disintegration chamber number B or something.
Yeah, exactly. No, that was a good one. Yeah, people forget how good the old Star Treks were.
Oh, I know, they're super good. They always
I
had a
mean,
great message.
The storylines were very relevant. They were very culturally relevant,
Yeah.
And honestly, the episode with the man with the black skin
Oh,
on
yeah,
one
yeah,
side and
yeah.
white skin on the other side was
Yeah.
chasing the guy who had the opposite, right?
Yeah.
And none of the crew could understand why they hated each other so much, and it was because he was black on the wrong side of his face.
I know, I know. It's like, I know. I think I can't remember who it was, but Captain Kirk said, like, I don't understand. You guys look the same. He's like, no. It's like, can't you see? It's like, and it's awesome because it just shows the lunacy of that.
Well, that's critical thinking right there, right? It's they've been conditioned to think in a certain way and can't break that conditioning. Where someone who doesn't have that conditioning is able to look at it and say, why is there a difference there? Why is that different? Why is that different?
Yeah. And that's operating without a lot of precision because you're like, well, you're kind of close, right? I mean, you look about the same. Yeah, fascinating, actually. Yeah, those are great. I think about that all the time. I'm like, what things do I put in groups that really probably shouldn't be grouped, and separated?
Well, I don't think you can avoid it, right? I think the grouping of things, not the prejudice, the stereotyping of things, is just part of the way the mind works because you don't have enough information to make a better decision. Right?
Yeah, right.
I can't be more precise in my definition of this group of things.
Yeah.
So it's a group of things with one characteristic.
Yeah, right.
I've talked about it before. The stereotype of the Japanese businessman who's a tourist and carries a camera.
Yeah.
And knows martial arts.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's a very stereotypical Japanese businessman, right?
Yeah.
That would have been maybe in the 80s what people would have thought.
Mm-hmm.
They know a lot more now to realize that that's not the mold. But how would you know if you haven't been exposed to that? You've got your experience, you've got what media and news and other things have told you, what history and books have told you. And if you're not exposed to a lot of that, then you've just got yourself to understand things.
Well, and this is where marketing is so devious, right? Because marketing would be like, if I wanted to do this, first of all, I want to group people together. I need to create an external enemy. So I'd say, oh, those people they're horrible people, right? It's like, I don't know if you know this or not, but they basically eat their own babies, right? And you just make up all these stories and you grew up thinking about this. Like, the only thing that we should do is kill them all, right? That's probably the best move. And you're righteous and you're justified in doing that. And it's like, oh man, when you start getting that kind of language, you're in trouble,
But that's so to me, that's an interesting aspect of like when we talk about racism in America, right? And usually you're thinking of somewhere in the deep South, so you expect someone to be racist and have all these horrible viewpoints of other races, particularly blacks, and it's like there are people like that. But that's actually being stereotypical of what a racist is. There are levels of the way people think.
Yeah.
But then you start getting into nuance and complexity. Someone could be very discriminatory against a particular race and not ever do anything violent or harmful to them.
No, right, exactly. Yeah. I know in my old neighbor in California, right? I remember him telling me, this is like 40 years ago or something. He was saying, black people, it's just best if you just avoid them, actually. Because they're stinky, they smell bad, and they're just they come from monkeys. But he believed that. I'm like, dude, like, where did you learn that from? How did that get in your head, right? Well, somebody told.
I don't understand how that viewpoint survives for years, So you get, especially in a world that's become more global, over time, whether you like certain cultures or certain background, we're exposed to so much of it anymore. It's hard I think, to hold that level of stereotypical discrimination in your head.
Yeah, right. But I think a lot of, you're right, because you're cut off, you're isolated. You don't have access to other information, actually.
But I think I told you about this. My wife was telling me that one of the people at work saw a YouTube short of a guy who took a gallon of gasoline out of his car and it separated into two levels. And then, look, Costco's adding water to their gasoline.
Yeah, yeah,
And people were believing it. I'm like, no, no, no. In California, we add, is it ethanol or some kind of
yeah,
alcohol
right.
to our
Like 10%
gasoline?
or something.
And
Yeah,
so it is two different types of liquid in there, but it's not
yeah,
water,
yeah,
right? And I'm like, if and I knew that without even looking any of this up because I just happen to know these things, these pieces of information. But
yeah.
I would say before you go assuming that someone's doing something nefarious, why don't you see if there's another explanation and the person who's telling you is misinterpreting it, even if they're
Uh,
doing it on purpose.
yeah, because Chris, typically this is called confirmation bias because they don't like Costco, and then they're like, see, there you
Mhm.
go, those bastards over there selling crappy gasoline. That's why it's so cheap.
So this is the thing: is you gotta stop hating things.
You got to have until
Hate
it's
causes
proven.
bias. Hate causes bias. So don't hate.
Yeah, because you're literally back to what I was saying before, some version of it. Your brain got distorted in some way.
Yeah, because you hear something that wasn't actually said. You hear something that wasn't, and it never actually portrayed and communicated in any way, right? And you hear this all the time when you have the people on different sides that are far apart arguing, because you said blank blank blank, or you believe blank blank blank, and like, I never said I believe that. I
Yeah,
never, whatever. It's like, I could be a supporter of Ukraine or Russia or whatever, but I never said that Putin's a good guy.
yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, I've heard cases where you have Democrats talking to Republicans, and the extreme ones. They'll be like, "Yeah, see, I told you, every single Republican, they hate clean water. They want a ton of pollution." And I'm like, I don't think that's true.
Well, that's when they're going so far that they're hurting their own cause, in my mind.
Yeah, because now you're just stupid. You're just being
But but
dumb
but
at
the
this point.
problem is they state something like that to kind of go to the extreme, and there are people who follow them.
Yeah, yeah, and I do that sometimes too. Let me put a little caveat on that. But I like to, if I'm trying to think through an argument, because sometimes in the middle you can't really see. So I'll intentionally let me push it right to the edges and let me see if it still holds up or not.
But that's fine because you're testing, right? I mean, you're still reserving judgment.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're scenario testing and the like. I have no problem with that. My problem is when that becomes all you do.
oh
So
yeah,
like when you're trying a solution for something or you're trying to figure something out and you get stuck up on the edge cases and you never
yeah,
address the problem.
right. Let's talk about abortion. I always think this. I was like, okay, so typically some people hate abortion ever. Most people are like, well, if you're gonna do it earlier on. The later it gets, the less we like it, or whatever like that. Up to the fact that then, like, I'd push it and I say, okay, well, is it okay then? Let's say you have a baby come out and he's 3 years old. Can you just kill the baby at that point? And we're like,
Hmm.
no, of course not, right? I'm like, okay.
So
So
then you
then
draw it back.
you
You
draw it back. So okay,
yeah.
where does it not become okay?
But see, so this is interesting because now you're arguing. You're in essence arguing when does life with rights begin? I'm not gonna say when does life begin because that's a different argument in my mind.
Yeah,
When does life with his own rights begin? And
yeah.
I think that no one agrees on.
No, nobody agrees on it. It's
Well, no,
very
I
different.
take that back. I bet you people who are more religious who are adamant against it would agree that it would agree that at conception is when the rights begin.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. Because the
Right?
Bible talks about that God knit you together even
Yeah.
before you were born. So
But
this
but
was
but
pre-planned.
when I hear people, I'm somewhere in the middle of I don't like it, but if you're gonna have it, make you got to
Yeah.
it's got to be
Let's
done
not
earlier,
make it
right?
birth control. Let's not do that. Right.
And the problem I have then with someone who says, they can abort it up until right until it was born. I'm like, no, there's a threshold in there where it stops being a clump of cells in my mind and becomes something way more than that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that changes by person. Yeah, mine's pretty relatively early on in my mind.
Yeah. I mean, if you're gonna do it, I mean, definitely the sooner the better.
And I would much prefer if we could find a way to make it the exception and not the norm.
Absolutely, I'd love that. Yeah, yeah. My argument is like, man, don't make it birth control. That's a different thing.
But again, I think this along with birth control, along with a lot of other things that happened in the world, the changing demographics, the fact that we don't need families anymore to survive in the world, right? I was just thinking about this today. Is like, why did people have 8 or 9 kids? In today's Toastmaster speech, the one woman giving her speech was saying her husband wants 7 kids.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, 7 kids? Oh my God. And then I started thinking, oh, well, religious people have lots of kids. And then I was thinking, but actually, if I go back 200 years in history, everyone had lots of kids.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Well,
And
they
it was
knew them because
because
they needed them to work on the farm. They were labor.
it was a family unit was a unit of labor,
Yeah, right.
and it was a unit to exist.
Yeah.
How could people exist? One person couldn't do everything.
Right.
So basically, the wife took on some roles, the husband took on some roles, the kids took on some roles, and together they were able to cobble together an existence.
Yeah, right.
And as the Industrial Revolution came along and made people more productive, you didn't have to farm 16 hours a day to survive.
Right.
Suddenly, you didn't need as much workforce. You didn't need as much people.
Right.
And so then the families got smaller. And then after the nuclear family in the 50s, right, the 2 kids, 2 parents, it began to change again, saying we don't even need a full for a family of 4 anymore.
Yeah.
You could have 1 kid. You could just be a married couple without kids. You could be by yourself.
Yeah, right.
Right? And so in essence, we have all changed our viewpoint of what an individual unit of society is. It's no longer a family unit.
Yeah, because it got easier. Because so much of this is true, and I'm starting to believe this more and more and more. But environment dictates behavior at such a significant level,
Well, along with this change of viewpoint, if people didn't need to get married anymore,
Yeah, right.
then women couldn't be on the back seat behind men as far as being able to make money, being able to exist on their own, because they made up half the population.
Yeah.
So when after the vote and other women's rights came along, and then after birth control came along and all that, suddenly they had the tools by which they could be on their own and independent. And I think it became that's how society changed to accept that as the norm. Is these are tools by which a woman can continue to be an independent person and not be reliant on others.
Yeah. Well, and society changed. I mean, their values changed, right? Before, man, if you were pregnant before marriage, that was like a whoa.
But
now
why
who
did they
cares?
change? They changed because the technology, the abilities for them to for women to not have to be beholden to others in society came along.
Yeah. Well, that happened in the 60s with birth control. It just gave women much more power, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
but then we also had free love, and we had drugs, and we had a whole bunch of stuff. We had a reaction to the Korean War. We had a reaction to the Vietnam War. All these things happened at the same time. You had a huge group. I mean, that's the boomer generation, right? So you had a huge group of people born after World War II, and they were coming into the workforce, and they were rebelling against their square parents. And I mean, so all of that hit at once, and you ended up with, we are living in the results of what the boomer generation created, good and bad.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. That's right. Yeah.
So
Wait, we actually agree on something. That's kind of crazy.
How we grunt a lot. We just like to argue a lot too.
Yeah, well, it's fun. It's like, for me, it's like sparring. It's kind of fun, But I'm telling you, next time I'm going to take a nap, because I'm definitely a little tired today. So my brain's not working as quickly as possible. So we got to keep things simple for me.
All right. Well, so I do want to work on more words. So not just facts, but also truth. We talked about maybe talking about reasoning and kind of the levels of reasoning.
Yeah.
Because I think reasoning
every day,
right? We have the levels of reasoning, but I think understanding, he's reasoning at a level 1. He's reasoning at a level 2. Maybe we use better words than that.
But I think that's not a bad thing. It's like, what level of reasoning do you want to use? Because typically what you want to do, in my opinion, is you want to use the lowest level of reasoning to get the job done, right? And certain tasks, they require just more brain power to solve.
Well,
more reasoning.
That's assuming you're actually doing the work to reason, right? So part of the problem.
What do you mean? Let's define work. What do you mean doing the work?
So if we go back to, I forgot whose theory it was. I should know this. I just looked it up the other day. But in studying, in schooling and education, there's this idea that there's different levels of reasoning. There's rote learning at the basis, right? And then there's an understanding. Level 2 is like understanding. Level 3 is the ability to analyze. Level 4 is like the ability to synthesize and draw conclusions. And level 5 is the ability to have an opinion, to actually, right? And so the idea is for you to have a valid opinion, valid meaning one that I would think has merit. You
Yeah.
would have had to go through what levels 1 through 4 to get to level 5 and have an opinion.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
And so when you say something to me, whether I agree with it or not, I'm going to say why. And you're going to go through levels 1 through 4 in your mind and present them in some way to me to say, this is why I have this opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting because I typically do that because typically what I want to do is I want to try to get the underlying principle because then I can apply that principle to all sorts of different cases. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. But that hurt me for a long time in jiu-jitsu because my master was like, he was saying to me, like, listen, I kind of like that you're thinking like this. But he said, this is really slowing you down. And the reason is there's just, the stuff is so advanced and so complicated and you don't know hardly anything. So right now, right, just for today and for a couple years, I just need you to copy. That means left foot here, right hand here, push here. You don't need to understand the why. And it really was, and as soon as I switched over to that, as soon as I stopped trying to understand every single thing and just copied like a copy machine, my jiu-jitsu, like I accelerated so fast in what I could do actually. Because he's like, you're basically what you're trying to do. I'm trying to teach you 1 + 1 = 2. And you're asking me about calculus. And he's like, you're not there. You don't have the background. You don't have the understanding yet. He goes, just copy. And I'm like, interesting. Because listen, I've taught, he said this, I've taught thousands of people. I know how to get you. If you just trust me and do what I tell you to do, you're going to get there faster. And I love that,
Now I've got some, as you're talking, it made me rethink something. So let me lay this premise down. If someone can present to me levels 1 through 4 for an opinion I don't agree with, but I recognize they did the work to get through to
right.
I respect their opinion.
Yeah, right.
I may not agree with it, but I respect their opinion.
Yeah, right.
The problem I have, and this follows kind of what the example you just gave, is someone who's out there yelling and screaming to argue a point, but doesn't understand any of the background behind it. So they've got an opinion that they've copied from someone else. They've copied the opinion from someone else who may have done the work actually, and actually may have a very valid argument for all we know, but often not for these really touchy topics. But let's say they do. The problem is the whatever warrior, be it left or right or whatever you're going for, be it someone who's a Trump can do no wrong kind of a person to someone who's any conservative is a Nazi. I mean, regardless of which viewpoint you've got. That thought is you're copying from somebody else, and you haven't. And that's why when people in this realm are asked about it, if they try to defend themselves and explain, they usually go back to things that don't make sense, because they haven't done the work. They haven't expended the brain calories to get through. This is the information. This is how I look at it. This is what it means to me, and this is how I value it, and that's why I come to this opinion. You can look at all the things that Trump did bad in his life, in his career, in his business or whatever. You could look at the fact that he's a convicted criminal, whether you agree with that or not. Well, actually, you look at it and you say you can discount it, which some people do. Others say, yes, but I'm okay with it, right? Or the others say yes, and that makes him a horrible person. Yeah. You can look at that piece of information, right? I think that here we look at, there's a fact, he is a convicted criminal. Yeah. Whether he should be or shouldn't be, that's a different. That's a different
right? thing. Because pretty much, they're
so
all
your truth and my truth may be different on that versus someone else. Yeah. But this is what I get to is like, I see how getting someone to a place fast is good, and giving them shortcuts to the understanding is there. Yeah. But I also see the bad side of it is you build a group of people who, if they never go beyond that.
Yeah, right. That's the problem. If you never go beyond.
If they never go beyond just parroting level 5 of reasoning, or whatever we call it, level 5 of critical thinking, then you end up with a bunch of people who think they know what they're talking about because they're copying someone else who supposedly does.
Yeah, right.
And this is why I really think it's important you and I come up with a way for people to ask the questions when they hear information. So
yes, we have to build a foundation. Yes.
Like, we'll be watching a YouTube video, and there's certain channels that I like, that I watch. Generally, I trust most of what they say because they've given me information that I've been able to back up, that fits into my anecdotal information in my life. All of that fits together, and so I'm able to look at that, and I will say I'm 90% certain that the information I'm getting out of them is correct.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And therefore, their opinions that they draw from them, I tend to give heavy weight to.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm like, you know what? I tend to agree with that. So I agree with that. That, though, went through, I didn't do all the work, but I did do work on the person who I think then is doing all the work.
Well, could you trust them, right?
Yes. But that's not saying that, someone who's out there spouting things that are crazy doesn't trust the person they're hearing it from.
No, but part of the reason if I can go back to my jiu-jitsu for a second, part of the reason, and it took me a year to get there because I'm so stubborn, and I do this, I overthink almost everything, and so my level of performance is never up to somebody maybe just a quarter as smart as me, but just does the work, because I'm thinking, well, why is that? What if we do this? And what happens if Yoda came in? How would we defend against that? Just all this stupid stuff that goes through my head. I trusted him. For one, it just took time. But the second reason is I just saw his capabilities. I saw that for him, a black belt and a white belt were both a child. And it was nothing to deal with either of them. And I'm like, okay, obviously this guy knows what he's doing. So I guess I'm going to have to trust him, right? That he's going to take me from here to there. And I didn't like that. I didn't like it at all, Chris, because I wanted to be in control, right?
That's a teacher-student mentality, right?
Yeah.
So in many ways, I could see where a teacher's role is to say, let me show you the answer, and then I'll show you how we got there.
Yeah, right.
Right? I could see that as being the thing. I don't see that when it comes to politicians. I don't see that when it comes to social justice or social anything, be it left or right, conservative or Democrat, because I think what ends up happening is people just want the result of the angry yelling person in the crowd.
Well,
and I'll just feed it that information. And I think it's true of what we saw from the student protests. They were all told not to talk to the press.
Yeah, of course not. Right.
There were spokesmen who had that. So it's like, why can't you talk to the press?
Yeah, because you don't know what to say. You don't understand. You don't have
freedom of speech with your group.
Well, no, of course.
No, it's because they want to control the messaging.
Yes, of course.
And not only that, the average person doesn't know enough to speak coherently on the topic.
Yes, right.
Right?
Exactly.
But to me, it also means because the average person in those groups doesn't really understand what's going on.
It doesn't understand. That's because it's emotional, Chris. It's much easier to move somebody emotionally than it is with logic, And in jiu-jitsu, it's like almost every single day, not almost, every single day, it was always about taking the emotion out of it, not feeling, and that's why there was this general progression of pressure. It's like, okay, you got to learn how to deal with a little bit of pressure, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And so it constantly sucked. Every single day of jiu-jitsu sucked because it was equally as hard as every other day. Because as soon as you got a little better, now your teacher would put a little more pressure. He's like, okay, we got to take you to the next level, right? And it was miserable most of the time. Now, every once in a while, he would let me rest for a while. He'd like, you reached a kind of a point. You've shown some commitment and some dedication. So I'm going to let you relax, and I'm going to let you just kind of let this goodness soak in a little bit before I start applying more pressure.
So how do you add pressure in critical thinking?
You start. Okay, that's a good question. I think I could do it, but I can't explain it to you.
Debate is different. Debate pressure is the attacks and the defenses, right? We can actually, I think, walk through the idea of we can have progressively stronger attacks on someone's position during a debate or an argument. But critical thinking is the actual thought process, right, that you're going through. How do you add pressure in that situation?
I think you make the problems harder, maybe.
Okay.
I mean, typically, like in math, you start out in math, you start doing very simple stuff, and then the problems start getting harder and harder and harder. So you have to start thinking at a higher level using what you've previously learned. So it's
So
always a
you
building block, like
so
stack little blocks on
you
top of
have
each other.
more complex. Well, I was thinking you have more complex outcomes. So I could give you the same problem and tell you. I think the way we do it, we give you the problem, we tell you the goal you're trying to get to in your critical thinking.
Yeah,
Find a way to get yourself to this goal
yeah,
in critical thinking. Walk through the facts, the information, whatever. Now, let me give you a more complex goal.
yeah. Well,
Before, I wanted you to defend the fact that Hitler was a bad guy.
yeah, right.
Now, I want you to defend the fact that, but he had some good traits. What were
Yeah,
they?
right, right. It gets harder. Yeah,
And it's
more
like
nuance.
it's the same exercise, but now you're adding nuance to
Yeah,
the outcome,
right,
right?
right.
And then you could say, now I want you to make the argument that the 78 years of globalization that we've had since the United States won World War II was a direct result of Hitler, and our lives would be worse had he
Yeah,
not existed.
yeah,
I mean, that. Oh gosh, imagine that. Oh, that would be an exercise. That
yeah.
sounds like fun.
It
Trying to
gets
figure out
harder
what.
and harder. Yeah. That's how I'm learning Greek. That's the same thing in Greek they learn because they're like, listen, I'm like, why can't we just start reading and work our way backwards? Like, well, we can, and we do a little bit of that. But before we even read anything, you got to start learning a couple of things. You got to learn the alphabet. If you don't know the Greek alphabet, you can't construct letters together in words, right? If you don't know what a word is, you can't build a sentence, right? And then there's then there's all this stuff, and it's sort of a building block, and you just slowly work your way like through it. And then at some point, sometimes they just tell you, it's like, listen, it's just complicated, but right now I just need you to memorize these 6 paradigms. Just memorize them. Later you'll understand why, but right now if I try to explain why, your head's going to explode because you just don't have the background to understand. And I think
Well,
that's
okay.
that's applying more and more
Let,
pressure.
us look at the Karate Kid, the
Credit
original.
kit. Yeah, right. That's a perfect example. There you go.
Wax on, wax off. What?
Yeah, yeah, wax on. What?
Right?
Wash my car, right?
Yeah, he had to do all these chores, but didn't realize that he was actually being taught the method on the way.
Yeah, literally what was happening is his body was learning how to move. And then what he did, he said, okay, now those same movements will also work over here.
Yeah. And as soon as he got the realization that, oh, this is actually, something that's teaching me, his mindset shifted from this guy's just using me as slave labor to he's actually teaching me.
Yeah, that's why you've got to have trust. Have you ever heard this expression before? You probably have. I've heard it a million times. Trust the process. Just trust the process. I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And assuming you've got a good process, you should be able to trust the process.
And you have a great teacher. Yeah, exactly. And I think what you can do is you can look at a teacher or a process. You say, like, if you look at other people and say, oh, well, that created their desired result. And even though I don't like it and I'm uncomfortable, I'm willing to go through it because I want that end result. And apparently this is just my path I've got to go through, to get there.
And it's tough because if you don't understand a process, then you have to have faith.
It always comes back to faith, my friend. Always.
Right? You have
and
to have
we can't
faith.
get around it. Yeah.
You have to have faith in the process when you don't have an understanding.
Yep, right. And most of the time we're just not smart enough to have a full understanding.
But it's okay. So you have to have a faith in God if you don't have an understanding.
Well, we don't understand how the world works. We don't even know how it got here, right?
So I'm getting. I think science again tried to give us the understanding and attack the faith.
Yeah.
And I think science itself got politicized to the point where it was no longer telling us the way the world worked. It was telling us the way someone wanted us to work.
Just religion, like anything else. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it was a form of control, right?
Of course. Yes. Of course. Yeah.
And as soon as science got co-opted to a form of control, did it happen before COVID? Science co-opted as a form.
Oh, Chris, that's been going on for hundreds of years. So yes, it was well before COVID.
Science.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh yeah.
Tell me. Give me an example.
Okay, so there's two things. Hang on a second. Let me come back to that because I can't give you a good example. I know it's like one of those things. I know it's there, but now you asked me for an example, and I caved.
I mean, because everything I'm thinking of, science changed its opinion, and our behavior changed, like smoking.
Science changes
Right.
all the time.
Right. The idea that doctors used to say smoking was good, and there was no science against it, and as soon as science started to show it, we slowly built a viewpoint that smoking.
Well,
was
those
bad.
are the marketing guys. The marketing guys always
So,
do.
but what I'm getting at is when politics got into science during COVID, we got a lot of information that wasn't well backed up.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Right.
I'm reluctant to say it was outright wrong, because I do think there was enough evidence that that steered their thinking.
Yeah.
But it definitely was not following the traditional level of rigor that science had followed in the past.
Right.
So I'm saying, where else in the past? And I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just can't think of an instance.
Okay, let me give you one. I got one. It just popped in my head. Right. So back in the day when we invaded, where we invade? Iraq? Or is that Iran? Where did we invade? Kuwait. Remember the whole weapons of mass destruction sort of thing?
Yeah, Iraq.
Okay, Iraq, actually. So then now going back, like listening to some of these CIA guys talk, they're like, we knew there was no weapons of mass destruction in there. We knew that.
That's not science. That's not weaponizing science, though. That's weaponizing
facts or whatever, right?
No. Science to me is the scientific method, the outcomes that you come with science. Right? Science is expected to have this level of rigor. Science is kind of held up to a certain esteem because of the scientific method. And all through up to the 50s, when science won basically the war for us with the atomic bomb, science has led the way for a lot of what we have today, right? The inventions and the like we have today. When has science been taken over by another entity that outside the scientific body and used to control us?
I see. Okay, yeah, I don't know. I'll think. I guarantee you, there's got to be.
Oh, I'm sure it has. I just can't think of one.
Yeah, no, you're right. Actually, right? So you're not buying into the science thing that we. So that's a fact problem. The facts weren't lining up, right?
That there was a political will to make a decision without scientific information, and instead of saying science isn't know yet, we're making this decision, they just co-opted science and said science says this.
I mean, maybe the one thing, I don't know a good example. I know I need better examples for you than this, but you talked about the cigarette thing. I mean, they knew that was crappy for you. I mean, these cigarette executives said, "There's no way I'm smoking these things. This crap's bad for you," right?
Yeah, I actually don't like the cigarette example as much, even though I go to it a lot, simply because I don't consider the medical community the science community.
Oh boy, now you're stepping on some toes now. It sounds like this is our little intro coming up part right here.
We need to find some doctors to come talk to us, because I think the sheer variety of information that doctors have, and that they're able to give us they're able to give us advice based upon this, right? I've been kind of living in the fringe of the dietary world of low carb and carnivore for over a year now, and I'm looking at this going, this is still not the norm. This is still not what the average doctor hears. When they hear you're eating all meat or whatever, they freak out.
Yeah, right.
There's still this belief that type 2 diabetes is irreversible.
Yeah, right.
There's still a lot of this stuff that glucose is a problem, insulin's not the problem, which we know for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, that is the problem.
That's just, right.
So there's this.
Well, hang on, insulin. Hang on, let me be clear on this. Type 2, too much insulin is the problem. Type 1, not enough insulin.
And that's why they're both called diabetes, because it has to do with insulin. The problem is they haven't. And so, but the concept is, if we were measuring insulin from the start, from a young age, we would have a much better idea of identifying type 1 diabetics, and we would, as people develop type 2, we'd have a much better chance, right? We would know before the glucose got out of control. We would know, hey, your insulin's way up high.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Right?
Imagine if 20 years ago someone was saying, hey, your insulin's double what the average American should be, and you're like, oh, okay. And you may have done something, you may not have done something about it, right? But then over the last 20 years, instead of eating the junk food that you've been eating, you might have said, oh, you know what? I'm going to take a little more effort to not eat at McDonald's anymore.
Well, I remember I talked to a doctor like 10 or 12 years ago, and I literally had to force her to like do an insulin test.
And this is why the medical industry, to me, is more of a religion than it is a science.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's a religious structure. It's a religious organization, just like the church.
Yeah, no, I agree with you actually. Yeah, I agree with you. Hang on, what else do I agree with you on? Not much, but I do agree with you on this one thing. Hang on, Chris, one more thing. God, I lost my train of thought, man. Sorry. It'll come back to me.
So, the doctors we tend to watch and we tend to like, who are on the kind of on the fringe, they're your heretics.
Well, here's the thing. Like, so let's talk about this. In fact, I was just watching the episode before the podcast, a couple hours before. So right now, the current thing is that for the advanced people that know better, that intermittent fasting is the way to go, right? So now there's a guy named Dr. Mike who's a very guy. He's like, that's kind of the current thing, but he's like, we don't really see any difference. It's like it's just we don't think it does anything. In fact, and as the benefits come down, we learn more just to eating a normal diet. We don't see any benefit to intermittent fasting.
So I think a big part of intermittent fasting's benefits are you're getting rid of times when you're eating crappy food.
Yes, right.
And if you're
okay, hang on, sorry. Yeah. In that case, but he's like, the premise is this, right? Before we go into this, you eat the same food and it's good quality food, right?
Why is intermittent fasting such a trendy thing?
I don't know. It's like this.
I think because people see results, and why are they seeing results? Because they're getting rid of a lot of crappy food in their diet.
Because they're eating less.
Number one, right?
Right.
Number two, when you eat in a window, you don't tend to eat as many calories as you would if you were eating throughout the day. So if you're eating,
I don't know if that's true or not.
I will bet you money on average that if I were to take the total number of calories eaten by the average person versus one who's intermittent fasting, that on days when they're intermittent fasting, the overall average calorie count goes down.
But yeah, for that day. But here's what I do actually. Then my next day I ate double.
But you're not following the intermittent. Then you're not eating normal and then intermittent fasting.
But I'm proud of myself because I'm like, I did intermittent fasting, so why isn't it working?
That's a different thing. So when you do a study and you look at it, you go, okay, you're eating regular on these days and you're intermittent fasting on these days. That's a calorie deficit.
Yeah, right.
And we know that a calorie deficit is beneficial because most of us are overweight to some extent.
Yeah, right.
So you get rid of crappy food and you have a calorie deficit. This is, regardless of any other benefit you might get from intermittent fasting, those are two big benefits to any.
Oh, huge. Yeah, right. Right? It kind of always comes back to just eat less food, right? I mean, you just eat too much.
So if you eat less calories, because we eat too many, because very few people aren't eating enough calories, and you eat less junk food, your life quality should go up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right.
Now we start getting into the nuances, like, oh, well, then we need to go into autophagy, and we need to we need to start burning fat more. And I think there is some of that happens. Yeah. And naturally, if we were living in a time when we couldn't store food, hundreds of thousands of years ago, then it would make sense. You would starve certain times of the year, which means you would go through your fat resources. Yeah. But probably we're better fat adapted at those times.
Probably, right? And so there's another doctor I was just watching. You brought up autophagy. So he was talking about the fact that, everybody thinks autophagy starts right away. He's like, listen, in my studies, I don't see autophagy starting until like 4 or 5 days of like fasting. And you're like, oh, that blows the whole theory out. So then,
I've heard it's 72 hours. I've heard it's 42 hours. I've seen all kinds of different numbers.
And it might be for different people. I've
heard it's 17 hours for some, which is why even if you do intermittent fast, you need to make sure you're getting to at least 18 hours of fasting. So it's 18.6. Right. So but then again, I've heard, there's benefits. We all fast every day when we go to bed, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So
it's just a shorter period. Yeah.
I actually think there's a lot of benefit to your stomach not to be continually digesting food.
Yeah, no, I think there's
one of the things I remember, my mom used to sell vitamins years ago, and she had me read all these books, and these books were they talked about getting colonoscopies and getting enemas to clean out your stomach, and so like for a week a year, you would drink apple juice and get daily enemas. Yeah, right. And the idea was to cleanse your system out, but it sounded silly. But one of the things I learned was about how the body processes food. Yeah. One of the things that they came up with is give your body a break. 1 day a week, either don't eat or eat something simple throughout the day.
Well, and that's been around. Every religion has that. You got to fast at some point. Every religion teaches you got to fast. Well,
right? Some of it's for purity. Some of this is like generally, your stomach is working all the time. Give it a break. Today, just have broth. Yeah. Today, just have apple juice. Today, what? It's like the juice cleanse idea. All these different ideas that are out there. There's some validity to it, and I think to some extent, you're giving your gut a break when you fast.
Okay, so here's what I would do, right? This is the way I would think about it. Clearly, we don't understand completely how the body works, right? Mm-hmm. And clearly, different bodies work different ways, actually. So then what I would do with all this confusion is I'm like, okay, let me go back to a time or a group of people that things are working well for them and then copy what they do.
Well, I mean,
And I don't have to understand at that point.
that's like the theory behind the carnivore diet, but there's this assumption in the carnivore diet that there was a time when we all ate just meat and that's all we ever ate. And
I
I'm
don't
like,
think that's true, right?
and I'm like, yeah, maybe the Inuits, the Eskimos did because that's all they had available to
Yeah.
them. But honestly, I have a hard time believing that, you know, we're hunter gatherers, right? And people say, oh yeah, see, we hunted. I'm like, yeah, but there's the gathering aspect
Yeah,
of it too.
absolutely. Yeah.
I don't know. So a lot of the presumptions that go into that, the assumptions that go into that, I'm not sure I agree with.
Well,
As
it's
much
interesting.
as I did see a lot of results when I was doing carnivore.
Well, yeah, and the reason for that is it's calorie reduction, right? It's cleaning your food up. You're not needing
Calorie
as much
reduction,
junk and sugar, right?
it's low carb, so your body's forced to burn
Yes.
something besides carbs.
But I will tell you something, Chris. I did carnivore, maybe not carnivore, but very close to carnivore, just basically meat and just vegetables and everything, and it worked like crazy. I mean, for like 3 months, it was
Well,
awesome.
Atkins was big. You know, that was the
Yeah,
same
that was
idea,
way
right?
back when. Yeah, but after a while, it stopped working, and I started gaining weight back. So it worked for a little bit, but it didn't work perpetually long term, right?
Yeah, but I'm sure
For
if
me.
we were to deconstruct that, we could come up with a variety of causes for that.
Could be, maybe. I don't know.
I think the number one thing is after about 3 months, it gets boring.
But I was still eating the same thing, and it stopped working. I didn't change my behavior, actually.
And your body gets acclimated too. That's the
Yeah,
other thing
yeah.
is people don't realize your body, if you starve your body of calories, and it's not starve, if you have a deficit,
Yeah.
a little bit of a deficit,
Mhm.
your body will learn to burn calories better.
Oh,
Your
yeah.
body becomes more efficient at burning calories. That's
Yeah.
why all the longest living societies actually do have a calorie deficit.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're starving, but you think about it. A more efficient body is what you want to have. You want your body to be good at burning calories.
Well, it depends
Not
on what
only
you
that-
want to do, right? Do you want to optimize for long term or do you want to optimize for performance, right? Two
No,
different.
no, no. I think you want your body, and the reason I say this is because this is my belief based
Yeah.
upon what I've heard, is when your body burns calories, it doesn't allow excess stuff to sit around.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't also allow excess flesh to sit around. This also means cancer. If your body is efficient at burning calories and always looking to recycle that cell because it doesn't need it anymore,
Yeah, right.
that means cells that are sitting there growing out of control are less likely to have an environment where they can do that in.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Yeah.
So my personal philosophy is if we got more fit, we'd have a lot less cancer simply because we wouldn't have all this free-floating glucose and other calories floating through our system that feed the
Well,
cancer.
yeah. And I think if you go back and look through history, you'll see like back in the 50s, I mean, this concept of like fatty liver and diabetes and really fat people, it's just what, I mean, you saw a fat person every once in a while, but it was very rare to see that, you know? And so you kind of ask yourself, well, what happened, right? And it's
We
like,
got a lot more calories. Calories got cheap. And,
yeah,
and
we got a lot of crappy food.
well,
Yeah,
but
right?
it started off as we need to make calories cheap because people don't have money. Right?
Yeah,
The
right.
economy wasn't huge. People weren't making a lot of money, so we started making cheap calories in mass for everyone.
Yeah, right.
And our farming industry supported that with corn subsidies and other
Yeah.
types of things. So it was very easy to do. And then the companies figured out, with spending a little money on research, they could process the hell out of these
Yeah,
base
right.
ingredients and make all kinds of complex foods out of it, right?
Yeah.
If you look at something that's made out of corn, it's not made out of corn. It's made out of 15 substances that are derived from corn.
Yeah, right. Right.
Right? And so when we look at that, it's like, oh my gosh, we're not eating corn anymore. We're eating, high fructose corn syrup or some other aspect, cornstarch, or all these things that are processed from it.
Yeah.
And it was great when we didn't have enough calories to survive.
Right, right.
Now that we have enough calories to survive, now we got to look at the other nutritional aspects that are
Yeah,
being
right.
missed out.
Now you get ding dongs and ho hos and
And the problem is those industries have gotten so large and so much money follows them around that it's hard to make them change.
yeah. You're not going to make them change because I think it's a great 1-2 punch. It's like, man, if I could have designed this, I'd have designed, okay, you're going to screw the food up. I'll screw the food up. I'll make it mass product. I'll make it really cheap. And then you're going to produce a bunch of drugs that like will keep people living, but you make sure they're dependent on the drug, that they can't get away from it, you know?
But it goes back to this Western medical philosophy, which is treat the symptom, not the
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Whereas you go to like a Chinese doctor, medicine doctor who You walk into their shop, it stinks because of all the different herbs they've got in there, and they give you this tea to drink that's supposed to get rid of whatever the problem is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, well, I that's not my problem. I got this problem. You go, no, that's your problem. Fix that, and everything else will go
Yeah.
away.
Everything else. Those are just symptoms. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I think that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's one of the things where I think the Western view of Eastern medicine is flawed because you have thousands of years of people who did apply their thinking and understanding and testing to this and actually have an understanding. And it sounds very woo-woo to us, but it's
yeah, because it's different. I remember I went to an acupuncturist one time, and he was like sticking needles and lighting them on fire, and I'm like, oh man, what's wrong? Where did you get your medical degree from? And he just started laughing at me. He said, literally started laughing. He's like, oh my gosh, you're such a white guy. He's like, basically, your medical industry has been around for like 200 years, right? And look at your health. And he goes, we've been doing this for 5,000 years, right? So maybe we're not so screwed up after. I'm like, oh. And then I thought, well, maybe he had a point.
When I was in Japan, the medical treatments that were covered included acupuncture. You could go get acupuncture done.
Yeah. I don't really like it. The idea of sticking a big long needle in me is just revolting. But my wife loves it. She's like, listen, I went to my sinuses were so clogged up, and she was saying the guy put a couple needles in, and literally it just started draining out, and I could start breathing again.
I find that true of the chiropractor, though. I go to the chiropractor, I've got a head cold. He adjusts my neck, and 20 minutes later, my sinuses have drained.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
I'd say chiropractor is a little closer to Chinese medicine than it is to Western medicine too. So.
Well, some of them are crack and rack and whack jobs as well too. Actually, it's so funny because this is the common problem, and this is what I would really like to figure out is like a chiropractor. Everything's a subluxation. If I just crack you, if I could just get you and crack you, I'll fix everything. And then the doctor's like, man, if I can just cut you or drug you, I'll fix everything. And it's like, what I really want to know is when do I choose which dude, like, and when? Because the last thing I want, if you have a broken bone, I don't want a chiropractor cracking. I want a medical doctor, right? But if I have a long-term chronic stuff, medical doctors, they just don't know what they're doing,
I remember, is it Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken?
Kentucky Fried Chicken, yeah.
He had a chiropractor he visited once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I went in California. In fact, she's still there. Is Dr. K, we call her, Dr. Karami. She was like my main doctor for like 8 or 10 years. And because we just traded marketing stuff. So basically we just did a little marketing. She'd kind of, help us out a little bit every once in a while. And I kind of miss that,
Wait, Kentucky Fried Chicken's changing states, aren't they?
I have no idea. I never eat Kentucky Fried Chicken.
I think they're moving out of Kentucky, which means are they going to take away the Colonel?
Of course not, actually. That's worth a ton of money, actually.
Well, I didn't realize how many states have honorary titles like that.
Oh, I have no idea. Oh, I know we got a Kentucky Fried Chicken just right down the street. Really close.
I think it's like, I forgot where it was, Iowa or some landlocked state has an admiral.
Oh, well,
so you can become an admiral of the state. And like I started looking these things up when I was looking up the Kentucky colonels, like all the famous Kentucky colonels.
Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
So several states actually have titles that you can earn from the state.
Oh, nice! Like being knighted by the king or queen or whatever.
Yeah, but obviously because we're not a monarchy, we don't have that level of things. But
so how much does that cost? Do you have to pay for that? I'm sure you do.
No, you got to earn. Yeah, maybe you got to pay for it, but I thought you just had to earn the right by
doing something really
starting
cool
a business, bringing in money or being a politician.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hey, so Chris, let me tell you
Yes.
something. So I'm getting a little bit tired.
Okay.
I'm thinking in my mind I'd like to kind of wrap things up, especially with that we're doing another podcast tomorrow.
Yep.
What do you think about like wrapping it up in a little bit?
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, cool. I thought you'd wow, that was easy. That's easier than I thought, actually. So do you want to go another topic, or are we ready to wrap it? Because we're right about
Okay.
right about the top of the hour.
I just had to look it up. So other states, Alabama has colonels. Arkansas has Capital Citation and Arkansas Traveler. You can become an Arkansas Traveler. That's a title.
Cool. All right.
Florida has the Great Floridian. Yeah, they're all.
What are Californians? What are
nothing on the West Coast.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so West Virginia has the Distinguished West Virginian. Let's see, Texas has the Admiral. Tennessee has a colonel. South Carolina, Order of the Palmetto. Oklahoma is a colonel. North Carolina, Order of the Longleaf Pine. Missouri, colonel or naval captain in Missouri. Mississippi colonel. Louisiana colonel. Kentucky colonel. Georgia lieutenant colonel. Virginia, Outstanding Virginian Award.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm looking at the states here, and they're like Southern and Central, and that's about it.
Yeah, being in the South is a different kind of thing, you know. It's a different thing living here. Actually, I kind of like it now because I'm used to it. But man, it was a huge culture shock to start out. You know, and part of me says, you know, I'd love to move around and go to different places like every 4 to 5 years just to sort of get a different feeling of different culture, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd imagine living in Japan would be like a massive culture shock, actually.
Yeah, but you know where I think you'd enjoy living?
Where?
Spain.
You know, it's so interesting. So my wife's sister's daughter, which that would make her niece to her, right? She's moving to Spain. Like in a couple of months, she's gonna go to school there.
Spain. I really enjoyed Spain. I think you'd enjoy living Spain. It may be a little bit hot for you, so you might. The other thought would be Ireland.
Well, dude, you know how freaking hot it gets here in the summertime? It's like 100 degrees with like 100% humidity. It is brutal and miserable, actually.
Yeah. So I personally would like to go to Ireland. I don't think my wife would want to put up with the amount of moisture there, but yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool. But I think I am going to Spain because I want to go visit her at some point. So maybe next year I'll be able to talk about my Spain trip. I heard it's awesome though. I've heard so many people that have gone to Spain that lived there for like not a long time, but like a few months, 6 months. Every one of them is like, I love it, I love it, I love it. It's the best thing
Cost
ever.
of living is low. You get a lot of expats from the UK who move over there.
Yeah, I haven't heard one negative thing about Spain actually. So.
Oh, I've heard negative things about them, but nothing that would turn me off from it. You know, who was I talking to just a couple days ago? They were saying, "Oh, they're so racist in Spain," and I'm like, I didn't notice it. But then again, as a tourist, I had money, so maybe they hide it when you're buying stuff from them.
Yeah. You know, it's so funny when people say you're racist. It's just such a. I don't even know what to say. I think some people just. They don't even know what it means for one. It basically means that's just a word I can use to like push back against you because I don't like what you're doing, so you're a racist. It's like weaponizing the word. I don't even. You ask them what does it mean, and they don't even know how to define it. Right? It's just you. You're it. Your picture would show up in the dictionary.
So there are a lot of countries who are very homogenous and don't treat others well.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're outright taking action against you, but like in Japan, if you're a foreigner in Japan, if you're a white-skinned foreigner in Japan, actually any foreigner, you can be Korean or Chinese too. They don't. They have rules in place that we would call systemic racism because they have rules in place on what you're allowed and not allowed to do as a foreigner.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Right? And the rules, as much as they're a rule-following nation, they bend the rules all the time for like, oh, you're a famous athlete and you want to become a Japanese citizen, we'll shortcut that for you.
Oh, of course, right.
Right. So but for all of that, even though you may not get all the same rights as a Japanese person,
right.
You're treated really nice there.
Yeah, right. And you know, to some extent too, I mean, there's always going to be that pushback, but you can control your experience a lot. I mean, if you're nice and try to speak their language and are polite, you're tolerated much better than if you're just a jerk, you know, a typical American, like, give me what I want now. And
when you get into the countryside, what I tend to find is almost every country, the people who live in the countryside are just, they don't worry about those things. They're just polite and nice. You know, they're easy to get along with generally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people, they don't need to be, they don't want to be. It's a lot of energy to have a lot of the distrust and hate that big cities have.
Oh my gosh, Chris, I cannot tell you how much happier I am, more productive I am right now. Because I used to watch a lot of political stuff, and I get so riled up. And basically, I would head with zero result. Actually, I rarely watch any news now. I just learn stuff, and I'm so much happier. I'm more productive. I'm just things are happening now. It's amazing. I was so caught up in this, I didn't even realize it. It's like you're in the water, and you don't know you're in the water. You know, you got to get out.
Yeah. No, I mean, I still turn on the news quite often. If the TV's on, there's a good chance it's the news, but it's local news, which is totally different than national news.
Yeah.
I don't have cable. I haven't had cable since before my daughter was born.
Oh my gosh, we haven't had cable in years and years.
Yeah, I got rid of cable in 2010, I think it was.
Okay, yeah.
So I haven't a cable in all that time, and so I watch whatever's on the airwaves,
Yeah. Okay.
and then nightly news comes on at 10. I'll watch the 10 o'clock news and see what's going on, and they'll tell me what Trump did today or what somebody else has said against Elon Musk or whatever, and I'm like, oh wow, that's crappy.
Yeah,
You know?
I have no idea. I got kind of freaked out because Trump said he was going to put a 50% tariff on Canadian like aluminum, and I'm like, oh my god! So then I just do a huge aluminum order because I'm like, okay, I got to get in before it's there, and then it turns out the next day, that's off now. We're not doing it. We worked it out and everything. I'm like, I just bought like $1,000 worth of aluminum, and I didn't need to, but.
But so, and this is the problem, right? It's okay if the administration is pro or anti-business. It's okay as long as the business can plan around it. The problem is right now there's just so much change happening so fast, and there's a lack of the ability to predict what's going to happen. So now all businesses are kind of freezing up and not moving until they have a better sense of where the direction is.
Yeah, because we need a little bit of certainty, right? Because just like toilet paper, man, back in COVID, if you saw some toilet paper, I'm snatching it up,
So as a general rule, those Costco packages of toilet paper, we used to keep 1 in the garage. We now keep 3 in the garage.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So you've been affected even years later. You're still affected by it. Your brain has been adjusted a little bit.
When the zombies come, I'll have toilet paper for longer than my neighbors.
Yeah. And it's funny, like here in a lot of the preppers, they're like, oh man, you need some ammo. You got to stock up on ammo, right? We need ammo. You need like lots of ammo. And I'm like, really? I mean, how much ammo do you really need? I mean,
Well, I do worry that we're in a situation where we can't change our culture enough to fix the economy before it breaks at some level. And I think if that happens, and I'm getting more to a when that happens, but if that happens, then I think, like you said, we need to be in a position where we have as much resources as possible. We need to have enough wealth to weather it.
yeah.
But I'm also worried about how other people are going to react. People who didn't plan, people who didn't have the resources. I mean, I think you're going to have a devolution to violence in some places.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no doubt.
We look at what happened during the Black Lives Matter movement up in Portland and how things fell apart there.
Yeah, right.
And that wasn't even with a lot of the people hurting that I think are hurting now with the economy. And will be in the next couple of years with jobs being replaced.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, it's just you just got to take care of yourself first, man, and then as you have resources, because the general thought is that I'm starting to be, if you're broke and sick, it's really hard to help anybody else. So you got to make sure your own house is dialed in before you can help somebody else.
I learned about a new term that they have in the AI world for these AI agents and tools they're making.
Uh-huh.
An MCP. Something with their
I've never
context.
heard of that before.
Something with their context protocol. Module context. I forgot what it stood for. It stands between your sorry, my monitor's shutting off. It stands between your AI chatbot, your LLM, which is doing a lot of the creative work, and the actual agent that you're building.
Oh, interesting. Okay, all right.
So, like, if you build something right now through N8N, Zapier, any of these tools, whenever they update one or the other, they stop being able to communicate, right? Your API changes, right? Because you're using an API to talk between the two things. And so what this says is this is an actual tool that the service person maintains, so that as versions change, it's still able to continually talk to the AI.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so it's sort of like an in-between.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
He gave a really good example. He says, what if your service number 1 was like speaking Korean? Your service number 2 was speaking Japanese. Your service number 3 is speaking Chinese.
Yeah.
And they all spoke different languages. How can you get them all to talk to the chatbot, the LLM?
Yeah.
Well, you have this in-between layer that makes sure that no matter what happens, they're always able to communicate, right?
Yeah.
And that's now being maintained by the service side, not the chatbot side.
That makes sense. That's kind of in my mind. I don't know why I get the analogy. It's probably not that great of an analogy, but that to me feels like money, because before you'd have to barter. Oh, I've got like 2 chickens. I'll trade you for, a shovel or something like that. But the problem is if I just had chickens, or wait, hang on, how's it go? No, if I would have to have somebody else wants where money goes into the center. It's sort of like a central thing where you can trade chickens for money, and then money is totally variable, not variable. Sorry. What's the right word? Chris, I'm losing. We got to end this podcast, man.
So
I'm telling you.
Yeah, you're talking about a standardization of work.
It sounds like
money,
that's what's happening
money
there.
represents standardization of work. This represents a standardization of API and other tools that will be used in the industry.
Yeah, it sounds like a good thing, actually.
Yeah. Well, and the idea here is one of the things that's being very fearful right now is every week a new AI tool comes out.
Oh my God!
And so if you buy one today, next week, oh no, I missed out on the new one that's coming out next week.
Yeah.
And this would help to alleviate some of that, because a lot of the problems you have are you want to do new things with your AI tools, and you have to reprogram or recreate them. This might be a way to avoid that.
Yeah. It's a layer of abstraction across stuff. So you just know one language, and then this thing will translate into everything else for you.
Apparently, it's showing up everywhere now on social media. So MCP, I need to look at this.
MCP, cool, awesome. All right.
Okay, cool. Then we'll talk tomorrow.
Yeah. So it's 8 a.m., right?
8 a.m. Yeah, I sent out the invite. You should have a on your thing. Let me go ahead and stop. Okay, so we're calling it quits for the day. It's almost at the 2-hour mark, but it's a pretty good one. Hopefully everyone enjoyed what we talked about, and if you have, subscribe, give comments. Anyone who spends the time to get to this point, I appreciate you.
Oh, I would totally appreciate you. Yes.
I mean, you have quite a bit of fortitude to be able to put up with us.
Because I couldn't do it. Yeah. Exactly.
All right. So, Scott, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Let me go ahead and stop this.
Sounds good.